I know there's been a question about the title. We like to use convoluted titles as academics, so we are looking at human behaviour. So this came a couple of years ago now. We started working with West Midlands Fire Service and started thinking about how incident commanders and people on the incident ground actually make decisions and respond to fire incidents. So this came really from the situation that happened with Atherstone and Galston mine, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the situation was there's lots of things happening out there in terms of the fire service, and there's lots of legal things happening at the time. And so West Midlands Fire Service wanted to know whether incidents such as Atherstone and Galston mine could happen within West Midlands. What were the risk factors in terms of that? And if they could, if there was any risk factors, how could those risks be mitigated? So Atherstone on Stour, for those that don't know, this happened in 2007. It was a vegetable packing plant where there was a large-scale fire that occurred, and 4 firefighters unfortunately lost their lives in this incident. Massive investigation into this, and resulting in the incident commanders initially faced charges of manslaughter, and obviously Warwickshire County Council were fined £30,000. Now all charges were dropped against the incident commanders, but what this did is raise concerns for incident commanders about risks that they take on the incident ground, and that can have massive impacts in terms of behaviour. So it could impact how risk averse they were going to be on the incident grounds, and this could hinder them from making decisions. So this particular incident had many implications nationally in terms of criminal law, in terms of fire service looking at what they were responsible for and any prosecutions and litigation that they may be faced with in the future. The second incident then was Galston mine, and this is where a lady had gone down a mine shaft, and lots of non-decisions were really made in this situation, and it resulted in the lady losing her life. And again, this had massive implications and looking at remedial actions. So there was here developing a group of specialist line rescue personnel, and it was looking at how the fire service could work with multi-agencies and calling the proper people in at the correct time in order to deal with these situations. So it came about from these 2 main incidents, plus others, that West Midlands Fire Service wanted to know how likely is it this could happen to us, and we could be faced with these situations in the future. So the project was looking at operational preparedness of firefighters and incident commanders on the incident ground. But as with anything within academia, we need definitions to work with because we can't measure something that isn't defined. So our definition based on focus groups with 5 personnel was that operational preparedness has been defined as individuals, crews and stations within West Midlands Fire Service, as this project is, being prepared to carry out their assigned tasks and roles with minimal risk. You can never have no risk, so minimal risk to public and fire personnel safety. So that was sort of our definition in terms of what we class as operational preparedness and what we wanted to assess in terms of behaviours on the incident ground. Okay, so as Preet mentioned earlier, my sort of academic background has been in the development of psychometric measures. So you know, we can talk to people about things, we can make assumptions about how people are going to behave in certain situations, but in order to get the empirical evidence and use evidence-based practice, we need to measure things, we need to assess things. And the situational judgment test is basically a psychometric tool, so it's an assessment tool that allows us to assess people's behaviours on situations such as fire. What is good about situational judgment tests is it allows us to use hypothetical situations, so real life situations, so incidents that you may be faced with or have been faced with in the past, and use them to predict your future job performance, so how you're going to react in a particular incident at a particular time. And what's different about these particular tools is where you have psychometrics that say assess numerical reasoning, so it assesses your math skills, or verbal reasoning, which only assesses one construct. What this does is allow us to assess multiple different parts of people's behaviour, rather than having numerous assessment tools to do that. We can just have one assessment tool. It also assesses job-related skills, so it doesn't assess IQ, It doesn't assess how good you are at something, it assesses how you respond on the incident ground. And what is great about situational judgment tests over other particular tests is that it has low adverse impacts. What this means, if we're looking at minority groups or people with dyslexia, for example, then it shouldn't have any adverse impact on them compared to similar tests such as cognitive ability tests. So, in terms of the phases of the project then, we decided that we were going to use this situational judgment test. We were going to develop one of these because it was the best tool for what we wanted to assess. But actually, although we've got this definition of operational preparedness, we didn't really understand what it meant. We didn't understand what built that up into something that we could assess in terms of behaviours. Therefore, we really needed to dig a bit deeper and say, okay, what are we actually assessing in terms of human behaviours? What are those things that make up operational preparedness? So in order to do this, we conducted a number of focus groups. So we got quite a few people together, about 8 to 10 people within a group. And these were tended to be bronze and silver commanders, and got them to talk through incidents that they'd been involved in and how they'd dealt with those particular incidents in the past. And thinking about what worked for them, what didn't work, if they could change things in that incident, what would they have changed. So we went through lots and lots of scenarios in terms of that to find out what actually made up their behaviours on the incident ground and how they responded. And then we used a methodology called thematic analysis, where we looked at the recordings of those focus groups and actually broke them down into themes to identify, okay, what are these themes that make up operational preparedness? And what we found is that in terms of operational preparedness on the incident ground, there were 5 main themes that were identified. 5 main themes were made up of 21 sub-themes, which I won't go into because it gets too complicated, but the 5 main themes were trust. So that's trust between incident commanders and fire personnel and vice versa, so the people that you're working with. Gathering information on the incident ground, so you get your call-out sheet, but then once you're getting to the incident ground, you're making decisions en route, and you're also gathering information when you're at incident ground and taking that in terms of informing your decision-making. Instant learning, so this would be coming from previous incidents that you've been involved with and how that incident's gone when you've responded in a particular way. Your skills on the job, and then your experience of working with that team as well. So these were the 5 main things that we identified that we need to assess to make sure that West Midlands Fire Service were operationally prepared and their risk was reduced in terms of Addiston and Galston happening in their area. Okay, so in terms of generating these particular items, we needed an item bank, so we need something to be able to assess people. And there's a number of methods that we can use in order to develop these hypothetical scenarios. We can use job analysis, where we look at individuals' jobs and break them down into key component parts. But what we do know with incident ground is that it only represents about 5 or 6% of their daily work. So actually, if we looked at a job analysis, it's all the other stuff we don't need to assess in this particular situation. Therefore, we use critical incident techniques. So this is about getting individuals together and talking us through the situations that they've been involved in, those situations that have gone particularly well, where they thought they could be risk factors, but they've identified situations and they've made decisions, and then decisions have been good. And also those decisions that have not gone so well, and getting them to reflect on that and see why something hasn't worked. Have they missed anything in terms of the information gathering? Have they missed something in terms of their crew? So it's really getting them to think through why things didn't work, so it's being reflective. So from that information, we did some analysis and we developed some hypothetical situations. And then from that, we did further analysis, got another group together separately, and asked them to work through each scenario that we gave them and think aloud, so talk aloud, how they would respond to that situation if they were faced with it now. So get them to respond in terms of actuality. This then developed our response item. So it's based on full response item choice, multiple choice, and I'll show you some of those questions in a moment. We conducted a pilot test, and we found that actually it had good retest reliability. So if we tested somebody today and then tested them in 2 weeks' time, they would get similar results in their responses. And one of the things that we do in terms of developing assessment tools is check for reliability, internal consistency, and anything 0.7 and above is classed as good internal consistency, which is what we found in this. So it's a good, valid and reliable tool. Okay, so this is one of the example items that were developed from the critical incidents that we got from the focus group. So if you just have a quick read through that. So some of you may be familiar with this one if you were involved in the focus groups. So you're given a hypothetical scenario, and what we ask at the bottom of each one is, what actions do you take? So these are the 4 response choices that you could have made from that. Now remembering with this, because it's in text format and not pictorial, you're only getting a snapshot. So it's as you arrive at the incident. We know that the situation is quite dynamic, so things are going to change, but it's what are your initial decisions? So which one would you have taken from that?
The bottom one.
Bottom one? Okay, any others? Anybody any different? Nobody dare say. I'm not testing you really. What we have found from this study, and this is something we'll go on to in a minute in terms of further developments, is that this really depends on what level you're operating at as well. So what we did find is that although we were trying to develop a tool that was looking at bronze and silver initially, is that we found that actually the majority of these questions that we developed when we started categorising them were bronze. So what we're doing now is looking at developing in terms of silver. So the correct response is the top one. Okay. And again, if you go back to the initial question, it's about your initial response when you get there, not how you think things might develop and then respond.